But thank you everyone so much for joining us today, and thank you so much, Shilpa, for joining us and being our amazing speaker.
Thank you.
But thank you so much. Today's session is Mental Health and Therapy 101, Breaking Down Barriers to Care, which will be led by the wonderful Shilpa Shah, licensed psychotherapist. So we're excited to have her here today to share her expertise on a very important topic. If we could go to the next slide, please.
Sure.
Awesome. So before we get into the exciting stuff, I'd just like to do some quick introductions, and we'll start by introducing South Asian Care. So I'm Nisha Tuzin, the founder and CEO of South Asian Care. South Asian Care is a digital health platform and provider directory created specifically for the South Asian communities. And our mission is to advance health equity and improve access to culturally compassionate care. So we focus on breaking down cultural barriers in healthcare, increasing South Asian representation among providers, and sharing trusted, relevant health information. So we do that through our provider directory, our resource hub, and community events. And we're helping to make care more inclusive, accessible, and connected for our community. So thank you so much for joining us. If you could please go to the next slide. So next, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. So Shilpa Shah is a licensed psychotherapist in New York and Florida and the founder of Woodrose Counseling. As a second generation South Asian American, she understands the unique challenges of balancing cultural expectations with personal well-being. Shilpa specializes in working with professionals navigating anxiety, depression, and burnout, offering a culturally informed and personalized approach to care. She views therapy as a collaborative space for reflection, healing, and moving toward meaningful goals, drawing from psychodynamic therapy, person-centered therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. Shilpa helps build self-awareness, find clarity, and create lasting, sustainable change in their lives. So thank you so much for joining us today, Shilpa.
Thank you.
And we can go to the
So,
next slide, please.
yeah, sure. So I know, Nishat, thank you so much for the introduction. I know a big part of what we wanted to kind of talk about today was this mental health 101 therapy. And so part of the goals and objectives today is going to be introducing the basics of mental health and common challenges in seeking care, clarify what therapy is and isn't, provide practical tools for resilience and self-care, discuss navigating cultural and social stigmas around mental health, and share key takeaways and actionable steps. Um, okay, so what is mental health? We hear about it all the time. Now, hopefully there's this movement towards kind of removing the stigma from talking about it. And I think a big part of mental health is, again, according to the World Health Organization, is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well, work well, and sorry, I think I got mixed up with this slide. Okay, learn well and work well and contribute to their community. It's an integral component of health and well-being that underpins our individual and collective abilities to make decisions, build relationships, and shape the world we live in. So mental health is the ability to navigate life's challenges with awareness and support. And when we talk about mental health, it's not just about diagnosing or crises. Mental health includes how we think and feel and respond to our daily stressors and how we relate to ourselves and others. Um, so what is mental health? Again, mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being, and it affects how we think and feel and act. And everyone has mental health, just like our physical health. And mental health is just important as physical health. So common mental health challenges that show up sometimes are anxiety, depression, burnout. Other examples are trauma, grief, relationship stress. So some common symptoms of anxiety are constant worry, restlessness, overthinking, some symptoms of sadness or depression, or sadness, loss of motivation, fatigue, and sometimes even isolation can point to depression, and burnout, exhaustion, feeling detached and irritable. So sometimes when we think of burnout, we might just think of burnout in the workspace, but there are other types of burnout, including caregiver burnout and parental burnout, right? Which is also a type of caregiver burnout. So in some ways, burnout is shares some similarities to depression. but it's very different in its own ways. And other examples that people struggle with are trauma, grief, and relationship stress. So sometimes it's important to slow down and pay attention to how we're feeling. Like I mentioned, sometimes mental health challenges can show up through irritability, tiredness. There's this sense that everything should be fine, even though maybe I'm not. And so there's maybe there's difficulty coming to terms with that. And so people are maybe less likely to kind of seek help when they need to. So it's important to pay close attention to overall changes in your sleep, mood, or appetite. Sometimes these changes can indicate that there's some changes in our mental health. So sometimes as South Asians and Asians in general, people are more comfortable talking about their physical symptoms. And so they might identify pains and aches, and they might end up going to their PCP and explaining that they have body pain, or they might notice their heart rate increasing or racing thoughts. Maybe don't even isn't something that comes up in conversation, but they talk about kind of the aches and pains. So sometimes people go to their PCP or the emergency room thinking something's physically wrong because they're feeling something in their body, but all that can be alarming because even though the tests come back normal, what they're feeling is valid, and it's important to recognize that. So sometimes it can be really confusing and frustrating. And so some of these physical symptoms are connected to stress, burnout, anxiety, depression, or unresolved emotions. So I know I'm kind of going through this, but I believe we can take questions at the end of all this. But again, some common physical symptoms that we link to mental health are things like our heart racing, chest tightness, shortness of breath. Like I mentioned, are often linked to anxiety or panic. And so sometimes these are the symptoms that land people in the emergency room or calling their PCP, worried about what's happening to their physical health. Other types of physical symptoms are headaches, migraines, dizziness, and that might stem from chronic stress or tension. And so then there's things like stomach pain, nausea, digestive issues that can kind of point towards emotional distress that affect our gut. And so now there's a lot of research showing the connection between the mind and the gut. And so if we are experiencing kind of gut issues, that can also be linked to emotional distress. And then again, things like fatigue, low energy, sleep problems can be a sign of depression or burnout. Body aches, muscle tension, back or neck pain. Sometimes long-term stress shows up as this. And then appetite changes. Sometimes you may eat more than you typically do or less. And this might cause unexplained weight gain or weight loss. And so that can also point to changes in mood and stress, which can impact our eating patterns. And also feeling kind of off or unwell without any clear medical cause. Sometimes that's emotional overwhelm in disguise. We don't often sometimes don't quite know what's wrong, but we notice that something is off. So these are some important symptoms to pay attention to because they might point to kind of emotional distress that you might be experiencing. So what often happens, many South Asian patients say things like, I keep going to my doctor, but they say my tests are fine. I thought something was wrong with my heart, but it was just panic. So like I mentioned, sometimes these experiences can be scary and confusing, especially when the symptoms are so physical and you notice and see those physiologic changes. And so when there's no medical cause, exploring therapy is important and can be helpful, and in identifying kind of the emotional, cultural, relational stressors that might be contributing to those sensations. So we don't oftentimes think about how our physical health can be impacted, but again, they're both connected. Our mind and body are connected. Our physical health is so connected to our mental health. Okay, and so here's therapy. I know a big part of today is maybe talking about therapy and how it can be helpful. there might be people that are skeptical about what therapy is and why they should get started or why they need to kind of address their mental health in this way. But again, therapy can help because we talk about the mind and body connection, and we can work in therapy to identify how stress lives in our physical body. So therapy is a place for learning. We can learn mindfulness, grounding, cognitive reframing, which just means we can challenge some of our negative thoughts, and other kinds of coping techniques that can help us manage the daily stressors that we're having, or even significant ones, right? And so therapy can help us reduce our physical symptoms over time and address the root cause, not just managing the surface level pain or struggles, right? So there's different types of therapeutic approaches, and I won't go into detail, but there are different ways or different approaches that can be helpful for some people and kind of addressing the root cause. And therapy provides or should provide a culturally safe space to explore family expectations, cultural pressures, identity conflicts, or other stressors that might be affecting your health. So again, the importance or a big part of, I'm sure, South Asian care is to close that gap, to provide kind of a directory or space for people to connect to providers that are more aligned with their cultural background or even speak the same language. And so a big part of therapy or therapy with South Asian people might be trying to find a therapist who's culturally informed and is more understanding or has some knowledge of kind of the cultural expectations or honors and respects your traditions without having to explain your culture. Okay, so this is kind of a chart to break down what therapy is and isn't. Again, I think it's helpful to look at it this way because there's a lot of misconceptions about therapy, things that we see in media or on TV. We see therapists in a different light. And so this kind of breakdown can help us identify more accurately what therapy is and isn't. So therapy is a safe and confidential space to talk about what's on your mind without judgment. It's a collaborative process where you and your therapist can work towards insight and growth. It's a place to understand your own emotions, your patterns, and relationships more deeply. Therapy offers a way to learn tools for managing stress, anxiety, and difficult life transitions. It's an ongoing process where change happens gradually and builds over time, depending on the type of therapy. You might be able to accomplish your goals in a shorter number of sessions versus another type of therapy, which might lead you to have more sessions over the long term. So a more longer term therapy. And again, therapy is a step towards building self-awareness, healing, and empowerment, right? Therapists shouldn't be telling you what to do or how to live your life or give advice. Therapy is a form of self-care and not a sign of weakness. It's in our culture, sometimes we don't really quite understand or maybe can't come to terms with what self-care looks like, but self-care isn't just about massages and facials and things like that to take care of you, but also your physical and mental health. Investing time and energy into maintaining your physical and mental health is also a form of self-care. And so here's the list of what therapy isn't. Therapy isn't advice giving. Like I said, it's not only for people with serious problems. Sometimes people don't come to therapy with any particular, sometimes people don't necessarily come with a particular problem, and that's okay too. And it can also be helpful for people who show up with a specific struggle that they're having. So therapy isn't about blaming your family or your culture, but creating an understanding and also understanding your family and culture with compassion. It's not a quick fix, but it might be a place for meaningful change that takes time and consistency. And it's not one size fits all. Your therapist should be able to adapt whatever their approach they're using to your needs. And that's a big part of therapy. And therapy isn't about being broken or ill, but about learning, healing, and growing. It's not the same as friendship, right? Your therapist isn't your friend. They're actually trained to support you professionally and ethically. And so again, just to kind of recap some of the points, therapy is a space for self-reflection, a space for guided self-awareness, skill building, emotional regulation, progress through consistent sessions, a confident collaborative space, focused on insight, growth, and coping tools. And you don't, again, need to be in crisis to start therapy. You may just be curious about self-awareness and want to improve kind of how you yourself and also how you are with others that are close to you. And so you don't necessarily have to have a particular reason to start therapy. You can also just use it as a place to explore and grow. So here's a big part of what keeps us from seeking help, right? In our community, the beliefs are deeply rooted, right? We're taught to be strong, to keep family issues private, and rely on faith or willpower. And so therapy isn't designed to take away from our cultural or spiritual value, but it can actually help deepen them and help us show up more fully for ourselves and others in our lives, our loved ones. And so barriers to seeking help, again, are shame and stigma, family expectations, cost and accessibility, and fear of judgment. So again, the shame and stigma is kind of goes along with the idea of we shouldn't be airing our dirty laundry with some stranger, right? There's a stigma of mental health that mental health isn't seen as a legitimate issue or struggle. There's family expectations, right? That sometimes we carry that burden and we don't have any place to go. Cost and accessibility. I know sometimes therapy can be unaffordable for some people, but now with insurance, hopefully with lower copays and accessibility for treatment, things are a little bit better. And I know there are different companies, depending on where you work, who might offer you EAP, which are employee assistance program benefits that can allow you to seek therapy through work benefits, right? So hopefully that's a little bit more accessible now. And then again, the last point, fear of judgment, right? We or even our community sometimes might worry about what will other people think, what will other people say if they find out that I'm struggling or that I'm seeking help in this way. So again, I think I talked about some of these, the barriers in the South Asian community. There's this perceived weakness. There's a stigma around mental health still, although there is a movement towards opening up about it. There's fear of judgment or gossip within the community. There's this pressure to just handle it or stay strong. And there's sometimes generational or cultural disconnect. So our parents may not necessarily, or grandparents may not even understand mental health or what it is, or even our parents might not quite understand what we're struggling with. And so it might be harder to open up to them about some of the struggles that we're having because they maybe don't understand the importance of it. And so common myths in South Asian communities, therapy is for people who are weak. We don't air our problems outside of the family. If I pray or meditate or get married or have children, then I shouldn't need therapy. Maybe you've heard of some of these. Maybe you've heard them in your community or in your own family. Therapists won't understand my culture. So again, I know these are common kind of myths, but also I think we can try to challenge them too, right? Before I move on to the next slide. So therapy is for people who are weak. So the reality is that therapy isn't quite for people who are weak, and instead it requires a lot of vulnerability and strength to recognize that something's off or wrong. And also this willingness to seek help requires a lot of strength, right? So I think it's important to kind of dispel that myth. The second one, we don't air our problems outside of the family. So speaking with a mental health professional means that they're actually legally bound to maintain confidentiality and privacy. So sharing your struggles might feel less risky or worrisome, right? You won't worry. You don't have to worry that, that your struggles will be kind of broadcasted in the community or anything like that. And so if I pray, meditate, get married, or have children, I shouldn't need therapy. Actually, you can pray, meditate, get married, have children, and still struggle with your mental health and still seek therapy, and that's okay. So again, these are not necessarily solutions to help you recover from mental health struggles. And then the last one, therapists won't understand my culture. So a big part of looking for the right therapist might mean finding someone who's culturally informed and someone who will honor your values, respect your culture, your family expectations and identity. So there's no need to explain or justify your culture. So these are just some ways that some examples that I use to kind of dispel these myths in our community. And so the key takeaway here is that mental health and physical health are deeply connected. Just because your symptoms don't show up on lab tests doesn't mean it's all in your head. The symptoms are actually your body's way of communicating that something needs attention, something deeper needs attention. And so understanding this connection between our mind and body can help us address our mental health with the same kind of seriousness as our physical health. And so it's always important to pause and listen to what our body is telling us. And that's a big part of paying attention and pausing and noticing what's going on with us. So how cultural identity shapes our mental health. So sometimes if we're bicultural, we might find that we're balancing two worlds. Maybe we're raised in Western traditions, but we're living in a Western culture, but we were raised in kind of with some Eastern traditions, intergenerational expectations, and cultural shame. Like I mentioned before, these are some of the things that prevent us from seeking help, and also this desire for belonging, right? We all want to belong to our community. Our cultural identity is often tied in with our community. Without going into too much detail, Eastern cultures or a lot of non-Western cultures tend to be more collectivistic, which just means that our identity is tied in with our community, and that is a big part of how we feel connected to our culture. And then in the West, there's this idea of individualism. And so our identity in the West is sometimes tied with our own kind of efforts and our success and progress based on our efforts, our individual efforts, right? And so being bicultural means that you might pick and choose what resonates with you, and maybe there's some parts of Western culture that you can identify with, and also some parts of your roots that you might identify with. And so again, cultural identity can be grounding, but also sometimes confusing. Many South Asians feel the pressure to succeed while honoring family traditions, and therapy can help us understand and honor both parts of ourselves. Okay, so here's some kind of practical things we can take away. So building resilience and self-care. So when we think of, maybe you've heard of mindfulness, but a big part of mindfulness is noticing, right? So taking 5 minutes to sit still, sit in stillness, breathe with intention. You want to pay attention and notice what's happening without judgment, right? Whether it's maybe notice some thoughts coming into your mind, or even you get distracted and start noticing things around you, or kind of the world moving around you. And so another kind of part of daily mindfulness might be to reflect with gratitude, or spiritual verses or prayers from your tradition. You can try chanting remembrance or guided meditation in your language. Types of movement and rest. So we can embrace balance with morning walks, evening chai or stretches, yoga or namaz movements as mindful flow, desi dances as joyful expression, midday naps or rest after meals, as sometimes our elders do. And we can set boundaries. We can navigate how to say no with love and kindness and respect. We can practice emotional detachment from toxic expectations. And we can remember that our worth is not based on sacrifice alone. And we also want to connect with supportive people. So positive support system is very important. We want to lean into our chosen family, our friends, or spiritual groups. We want to join South Asian support spaces or therapy groups and share burdens like we share food together, right? We want to lean into those supports that really help us and empower us. Okay, so again, I think I mentioned the mindfulness, practical tools for coping, pausing and noticing, checking in with yourself daily. You breathe before you react, right? So sometimes we feel overwhelmed and we might react and then later regret something that we said to someone that we care about. So it's important to pause and breathe before you react. Use mindful breathing to calm the body. There's different types of breathing exercises that we sometimes can use. A simple one that I can briefly kind of talk about is box breathing, which is this idea that you're making a box with your breath. So we can inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, and then again, inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4. So you can do this box breathing exercise as many times as you need to help you feel more calm and regulated. Breathing is a great tool to help us regulate our nervous system when we're feeling overwhelmed. And I guess the next one is reframing unhelpful thoughts. A big part of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is working to reframe unhelpful thinking that can lead to us feeling a certain way, right? So if we're having negative thoughts and we're engaging in self-criticism, we might feel a little more lower, we might feel more depressed. And number 4 is strengthen boundaries. So explore what boundaries could look like for you. Trying to navigate them in a culturally sound way is important, right? Boundaries in the West is oftentimes, it has this reputation of being very firm and it doesn't always quite fit with cultural expectations or ideas of how to speak to people in our community. Number 5 is build rest into your routine. So rest is productive. I know in some ways we're raised to think that we always have to be busy, we always have to be productive. It's almost weaved into our DNA, unfortunately, that we always have to be on the go and we always have to be doing something. And so a big part of maintaining our mental health can be resting, to find intentional time to rest. Rest is productive. And then number 6, connect intentionally. So healing happens in relationships. We want to lean on those relationships that we have with our friends, with family, our chosen friends and family. These are all important relationships that can help us maintain our mental health. And I know there's a lot of research now that connecting with people in our supports and building meaningful relationships actually helps strengthen our resilience and helps build and maintain our mental health. And so the last one, practicing compassion, be gentle with yourself in moments of struggle. We all experiences bumps in the road. We all have struggles sometimes, and it's okay to reach out for help when you need, and also be kind to yourself. So the last kind of quote on the bottom, you've probably heard it before. You can't pour from an empty cup, and tending to your inner world is necessary, right? So what does that mean? We want to replenish our energy, the energy we're giving to our relationships in our lives, to people, to our work. There's many things we give our energy to. And so we always have to find time to replenish that energy, because that can ultimately lead to burnout. So that's an important point to remember in all of this. And so a big part of finding the right therapist, maybe a big part of why you chose to log on today, is kind of figuring out what do I do when I need to find the right therapist? What am I looking for, right? So ask about cultural understanding. You can ask questions like, have you worked with South Asian patients before during your consultation? How do you incorporate cultural awareness in your work? A good therapist welcomes those questions to help you find the right fit. You can also clarify therapy style and approach. Therapists sometimes use different approaches like CBT, psychodynamic psychotherapy. mindfulness, integrative approaches. So you can also do your own research to figure out what resonates with you, what you think might be helpful. But ultimately, it's not only about kind of qualifications and particular specialties that a therapist has. A big part of therapy is the therapeutic kind of relationship, which means, are you comfortable with this person? Do you feel comfortable being your authentic self? So kind of going back to this therapy style and approach, something you might want to ask during consultation is, how do sessions look? What can I expect in our work together? Understanding their process will help you know what works best for you, and trust your comfort level, right? Like I mentioned, therapeutic relationship is the most important factor in kind of healing and progress. And so you don't necessarily only have to rely on their qualifications, although it is important. But notice how you feel after the consultation or the first session. Do you feel heard, respected, comfortable being yourself? It's okay to meet with more than one therapist for consultation before deciding whether or not you want to move forward with therapy with them. And this last slide is really important. We did talk about kind of looking for the right therapist, but if you are experiencing any emergency or crisis, it's important that you, one, if you're in immediate danger, call 911 or go to your nearest emergency room. There's also 988, the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. It's 24/7. It's a warm line. It's free and confidential. And there's a text line if you don't necessarily want to sit on a warm line. You can also text home to 741-741 to connect with a trained crisis counselor. And I've also listed other numbers that might be helpful for the South Asian community if you're experiencing any kind of crisis or emergency. And I really hope you all found this helpful. And I think that's the last slide. I think, let's see. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think I found the last slide. So I think that's my bit. Do you or anyone else have any questions for me?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Shilpa. But we have a few questions before I jump in. Just want to say that was a really, really informative discussion. Thank you so, so much. And here you'll see a little screenshot of Shilpa's profile on the South Asian Care Directory. If you are seeking care, feel free to look at our provider directory. You can learn even more about Shilpa, how to reach her, a little bit more about kind of the specialties she has, insurance she accepts, languages she speaks. So it's quite easy to use and user-friendly to find a provider that meets your needs. But with that, we'll jump into the Q&A. We have a few questions, so I'll read them out to you, Shilpa.
Sure.
So we have one question. An elder in my family seems to be struggling. I think therapy can be beneficial, but I'm not sure how to have this conversation. Any suggestions?
Sure, yeah. I think that's always tricky, right? Because with elders, they might be really hesitant to open up to someone new. And so again, when it comes to elders, it might be helpful just to get it to be curious, right, about their experience. Maybe they're not quite ready to open up to a new person or even go to a therapist, for example. But even kind of being curious about their struggle or asking questions can be really helpful. Therapy, sometimes there are support groups that meet at, I don't know where you're located, but there's a community organization, a nonprofit called South Asian Council for Social Services in New York City. And so they often have elder kind of support groups that meet in person, which might be a good place to explore kind of struggles in a kind of a group setting. That might be helpful. Even just starting the conversation about how our physical health is really important, but so is our mental health, and finding that connection between our physical and mental health is something that maybe they would be willing to consider. I know it's always a tricky conversation to have with the older generation who may be struggling, but also maybe they feel a lot more comfortable talking about their aches and pains, like I mentioned, than opening up about mental health. So I hope that answered your question. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer too.
Perfect. And then How can someone tell the difference between everyday stress and when they might need professional help?
That's actually a really good question. So, we all experience daily stressors, right? We have the ups and downs of life. I think the biggest indicator of whether or not you actually are struggling, and I think I mentioned kind of some important aspects to pay attention to. So we want to pay attention to our sleep, mood, and appetite. So any kind of significant fluctuations in your sleep, mood, and appetite can be a sign that something is wrong, right? It can be an indicator that there might be some other there might be something else going on. And so I think the biggest kind of factor that separates the daily stressors of life is whether it affects your functioning, right? So a big part of our diagnosing in general, and not to say that you have to get diagnosed to seek help, but a big part of it is to see if there's any changes in your social functioning, meaning are you hanging out with your friends? Are you doing things that you like to do? Are there problems at work? Are you missing work? Are you calling in sick? Are you maybe not performing as well as you were, right? So there's also kind of the physical aspect of it, right? Are you noticing any physical changes? Are you noticing that maybe you're not waking up um, or you're sleeping too much, right? I know we talked about sleep, mood, and appetite. Are you sleeping too much? Are you sleeping too little? Are you still waking up fatigued, right? Are there things that are happening that are impacting your day-to-day functioning? Are you able to get up and do the things you need to do for your personal hygiene? Are you able to feed yourself? Are you able to get to work? Are you able to socialize? So we want to take a big picture look at your what's going on all around you too, right? Because that informs how, if you're struggling, how that's impacting you, right? And so the day-to-day struggles that we have, we can work. Therapy is a great place to build some tools and techniques to help us manage those daily stressors. But when it starts impacting our functioning is when we kind of, that's a bit of a red flag, right? We want to seek help at that point, if not earlier. I hope that that answered your question.
All right. What does the first therapy session usually look like?
That's another really good question. So therapy and initially, the first session is typically called an intake session. So in an intake session, it's about 1 hour. I think it's maybe 53 minutes or so to be exact. But the point is that the intake allows an opportunity for the therapist to kind of ask questions about your medical history, social history, family history. So in that first session, the therapist would likely ask more questions about your history and kind of to get a big picture idea of you, right? So they want to understand what makes you you, and what are the things that impact you, and what are the experiences that have shaped who you are, right? And so the intake is a bit informative, and obviously when it comes to medical history, that's an important aspect too, right? Because if there's any medical issues that you're struggling with, that can also impact your mental health, right? So the intake session is really important in that aspect, but also the intake session will allow you to clarify your goals for therapy, right? So therapy isn't just a place where you just talk for hours and maybe vent, but we want to have some actionable steps you're taking towards your goals, right? So if you say that you're struggling with anxiety, we want to make sure that the treatment plan reflects that we're actually working on ways to manage your anxiety, right? So just a very basic way. The intake is really helpful in engaging what you're going to do in therapy, and maybe even ask questions about the therapist's approach, why they think certain approaches would be helpful for you, and also ask questions about the process itself, right? So the first session may not be a typical therapy session, and that's okay. It's designed to be that way. The sessions after might feel a little different based on what kind of approach the therapist is using.
All right. So someone said, sometimes elders in our collectivistic cultures can feel defensive in coming to therapy. Also, once they begin, they might struggle in keeping a consistent and frequent attendance to therapy. Have you dealt with this? And if so, how can you have a conversation surrounding the importance of consistency?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I know. Oh, sorry, I lost it. Okay. Again, I think a big part is when they start being defensive, when your elders start being defensive, I think it's important to come from a place of curiosity, right? Like sometimes they're defensive, but maybe they don't quite understand certain things, right? They maybe don't know what therapy is. And so I think getting curious about what they're resistant about or why they're being defensive, or even just like understanding what's preventing them from sharing or wanting to seek help might be half the battle here, right? Because we want to lead with compassion and curiosity. And again, that will allow them to open up a little bit more to decide whether or not therapy is for them. And maybe it's not, right? Maybe sometimes and our elders don't necessarily resonate. Maybe therapy doesn't resonate with their upbringing. But I think a good way is they can also lean on their community. I think a good way for elders, especially, is connecting with other elders. Maybe it's family, maybe it's their peers, right? And so I don't think healing only has to look like therapy. I think healing can look like maybe building a community, or maybe it means going to a place of worship, right? Or maybe it means connecting with other family or community members, or doing something meaningful. Maybe it means volunteering or giving back or doing seva. I don't know. Seva is just another way to describe volunteer efforts, and different communities have different forms of giving back to the community. So I know there's different words and different languages for volunteering and giving back to your community. I hope that answers your question. And yes, you said the part of it was, have I dealt with this? And how can I have a conversation around it, right? Around consistency. So I personally haven't dealt with it because the demographic that I work with are professionals, young professionals. And so I've had a few older people, but if they're showing up in my office, they're likely open to therapy. So maybe in my volunteer experiences with the older community, the older South Asian community, I've come across kind of resistance. Maybe they haven't quite understood what mental health is. So a lot of it is like educating them on mental health and how it shows up and what it can look like. And I think a lot of my work with the older population was a lot around educating them, psychoeducation, and explaining to them what to pay attention to if you're struggling.
Thank you. Then we have just one more question. So someone said, I'm going to start my journey to find the right therapist soon. I'm wondering, what are some ways South Asian therapists integrate cultural understanding into their work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, to whoever asked the question, I'm glad you're finally deciding to take this step. I know it's really difficult, and it takes a lot of vulnerability and strength, like we mentioned, to get to this point. And so, the part of the question was, what am I supposed to look for ultimately when looking for a culturally informed therapist, right? Okay,
Yes.
just to clarify. So again, when we're looking for someone who's culturally informed, it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that's from your background, right? I know South Asians kind of span different backgrounds and languages, and the culture can differ from different parts of South Asia, right? I mean, South Asian continent is so diverse in languages and things like that. So I think the main important part of finding a culturally informed therapist is someone who's going to respect your culture, but also maybe ask questions and be curious, because even if we're the same background, we might not necessarily have the same upbringing or the same understanding of our cultures. And so I think coming from a place of curiosity is a really important quality for any therapist, particularly someone who's culturally informed, because they want to know what your experience is. They want to know how they can help you. Or instead of again, a big part of finding someone who is culturally informed means that they're going to respect your traditions or your cultural kind of background. And maybe they won't necessarily understand everything, but they're always open to learning more and finding better ways of helping you ultimately. I don't know if that specifically answers your question. But yeah, again, a big part of the therapeutic alliance and relationship is finding that person that maybe you feel really comfortable being authentic and open with, even if it means that you don't necessarily speak the same language, or maybe your upbringing was a little different.
Wonderful. Well, those are all the questions that we had today, but if anyone thinks of anything after the session or has any other questions, please feel free to reach out to myself or Shilpa. We're happy to help you in answering any questions that you might have. I just want to say thank you again, Shilpa, for being an amazing speaker and going over this very, very important topic. And thank you so much for joining our community members. If you are someone who is seeking or considering to seek therapy, I encourage you to go to our directory and find someone that can fit your needs. Shilpa has equipped us with all the wonderful questions to ask when we're in that process. Or if you're on the other side and you are a provider or clinician, I encourage you to join our directory so that more people can find culturally compassionate care. And yes, the directory is nationwide, so I hope it has all your needs on there. And if you have any questions, just feel free to email us or send a message to our South Asian Care Instagram. We're happy to help with whatever you may need. And as always, we continue to do events on various topics that our community members find helpful. So feel free to send suggestions or join events on our website, and register for free. But thank you so much again, Shilpa, for joining us
Thank
today.
you. Thank you, Michelle.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye.